Hello everyone, this is Dr. Rick Whitman. This is Memorial Day weekend and I'm recording this on Sunday morning, the day of the Indy 500 race, which is held locally to me. That being said, today marks the first day of the traditional summer season and it's a time of kind of renewal, what we're all about, what we're doing. Most of you are doing fine. This is the point at which some students start to fade, so you want to kind of lean on each other, help each other, pay attention to what you're doing, and pace yourself during the week. Now we'll go through an introduction of what you'll see on Module 4. I want to start with the end in mind, and that is this. You have 4 items due this week, a total of 180 points. In other words, 18% of your final grade comes out of what you do this week. I want to encourage you that if you don't do well on a particular assignment, you miss an assignment and end up taking a 0, it happens. I wouldn't worry so much about a particular assignment other than the projects, which are very important, but rather the total points and the process you're going through. Once again, this is an introductory course that is intended to help you with all your college courses, not just science. So when you say to yourself, oh, I'm just not into science, you're actually setting yourself up to not do well here and in future work as well. So take what we're doing for you and with you as a good starting point to build a future academic career, or possibly even transfer into your business life. Now, I pulled up this page from the Southern New Hampshire University website because they're big on their campus experience for the students who are what we call resident students. But if you're a commuting student or a distance education student, as we are and as I have been in the past, then there's a lot of other things in the Southern New Hampshire website that is worth your while to check out. The library, if you've not spent time in the library, please do. Not only for this class, but for future work as well. Now here we are in a larger explanation of Module 4, and you want to do this. There's a lot of natural science happening in the news right now. The weather right now is the phenomenon of a lifetime. Before really getting further, I want to show you these 4 again. The quizzes are more or less standalones. The short answer is meant to develop your thinking, and the project is a method for you to demonstrate what you're doing. Think of it as an exam. And since you have 3 of these worth 120 points in your semester, an awful lot of your grade depends on how well you do in your projects. So if you're trying to do your project in an hour or less, you're setting yourself up to do less than ideal work, and I think you can do better. I want to show you some things here. This natural science in the news, there's a quiz associated with that in the Beware the Blob. Now we get into some stuff that's going to help you for the rest of this semester. This Who to Believe section, we get into how strong is the evidence? What is evidence? And there's a lengthy article here, not lengthy, but a really good reference site here as to how we tell truth from fiction and how we judge science to be truthful. Now, the analogy I like to use is that this is like you're a detective and you're solving a murder mystery. What you have to do is weigh every single piece of evidence against every other piece of evidence to see if you can figure out what really happened. Or if you're an earth scientist, you look at the ground the way the ground is now and you try and imagine how was it 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago, using tools and technology that you have. Next, you're going to look at this video that Jenny McCarthy, who's an activist on autism and caused by injections, and how her reasoning really is not sound, but a friend of mine once said, you certainly are entitled to your own beliefs, but not your own facts. This one is kind of interesting, and another one, there's a follow-on about what we know about. One thing we know about autism: vaccines are not to blame. And I know that autism has a fascination for some members of the class, and frankly, it should for all of us. I do apologize for any ads you see on any of these websites. That's out of my control. This one's from National Geographic, and the nice thing about National Geographic is it tends to be what's called a peer-reviewed site, where they don't They don't make stuff up out of whole cloth. They usually have good references and good reasoning. And that's a big piece of where we're going now in your class. So what we're trying to do is get into what is bias. Bias is where you have either inclinations, leanings, prejudices, any of those things that interfere with seeing things as they really are and cause distortion in your judgment. Following that, you have your second quiz on misinformation and bias. And oh, by the way, you can take these twice. The highest score is counted. Some people only take these once. I really encourage you to take it twice. And then you're going to get into money and research. Now, this particular portion, this 4-3 section of this module, is worth concentration, because this frankly will put a lot of wind in your sails for things you're going to be doing for the rest of the semester. And this is how we can get away with or know when people have been slanted or biased in their views. So we talk about how we support science. And sometimes science, this is the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland. Obviously, this is not something you can do in your own bathtub. It takes a lot of support and a lot of money. Some research takes a consortium of both money and scientists to make it come together. So there'll be physicists and electrical engineers, for example, as well as metallurgists and other people involved in the design of this instrument. And the real problem with funding is that sometimes you want to please the people who are supporting you. So you want to sometimes find yourself leaning towards a perspective that they would prefer to see rather than what really the data show. That's worth keeping in mind, especially when we get into the next section. I have to caution you, do not get sucked into the emotion of this next section, or it will cause you distortion or judgment or errors of your own, especially when doing your project this time. And there's two articles here. One is by Neil deGrasse Tyson, a very famous cosmologist out of New York City. And Dr. Tyson does some really good stuff, great explanations. I love the guy. I've heard him in person. If you ever get a chance to, please do. I do have a little bit of problem with part of what he says about Dr. Claire Patterson, who, while he did do some good work early on, later on he was banned from nearly every scientific society because he was making up stuff and couldn't prove what he was doing. So take that with a grain of salt. And the other one is this big tobacco in science, where big tobacco, the tobacco companies, and you now start to see the same thing happening with the vaping companies, where they're trying to hold on to their base and pretend they really want to be good to everybody, when in fact they're really trying to stay in business. If big tobacco not only bought research for a lot of years, they actually changed how we do research and did us a big favor. These days, when you write a journal article, which is a peer-reviewed system where you write an article, you and a group of scientists write an article, the editors then send it out to other people that you may not know who are in your field, or they may know you even, and it's called a blind review, where they then look at your numbers and see if you've been truthful in your work and whether or not you have any conflicts. You also have to declare as a author whether or not you have any conflicts of interest, and that can be financial. It could be that a company wants you to do research and they've given you a big vacation home to use. That would produce a appearance of a conflict of interest and possibly a real conflict of interest. So you have to choose one of these two articles and you're going to pull it apart, and it gets pretty dicey. Recall, please, you want to stick to the facts. You're going to be like a murder detective, and you're not going to get emotionally involved. If you get emotionally involved, it will hurt your judgment. So be that impartial judge. And this is how you'll know if you're going off the rails. And here's where you really want to check the rubric for this assignment. Let me recenter this so you can see what we're doing, if I can. I'm having trouble. The way these rubrics work is, these are the items we're looking at. The evidence of your argument, this is your short answer. Did you address funding? If you don't address funding, you can't get any points here. How well you write and speak, how well your sentences come together. Now these actually are percentages. So 40% of the 40 points, or 16 points, comes from this part of the argument. 40% comes from here, 40% comes from here, and together these make up 100%. This is actually percentage. If you get all of them, you'll get 40 points for the assignment. This should help you. Now, since you have access to the rubric, this also tells you that for the evidence, you should explain why scientific evidence provided by Patterson or by researchers explaining secondhand cigarette smoke. So Patterson did the lead work. That's the first article. So you either do that one or you do the second one. It's either or. And so what you want to do is make sure you've answered that. If, for example, you speak to evidence but you don't tell me which one you're talking about, it's very hard to give you 40 points. Actually, I assign you 40 points. It's even harder to assign you 30 if you don't declare what you're talking about. Same with funding. You don't explain how big money gets involved in these things, it's tough to get you any points. Some of you are writing it very carefully. Many of you are writing stuff down and sending it without even checking the spelling. Please do that. You're college students. It requires college work. Let's move on. Now the next section gets into how we wrap up how we make questions. The questions we ask, as you've seen, have become more and more important and get mentioned all the time. To do this well, you need to review these other blocks that you've already done, and then you should look at this. This is the worksheet sample. Now, you can cut and paste these questions, this piece right here. You can do that, and you'll get the Turnitin score will be a little higher, but you won't get dinged for that. If it helps you know that you've answered each of these, go ahead and cut and paste these, the typing next to the number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. So you really should have a 5-part answer to this thing when you're done. Now you need this in order to do the project, which comes up next. So really our goal here is to develop questions about fundamental aspects of the natural world that inform personal assumptions, beliefs, and values. Remember, one of the things that we're trying to do is to get you into being a good thinker. Not just for science. The science class is the vehicle to learn, to show you how to learn how to do this. It is not a lesson by itself. You can apply this to any other class you ever take, or to anything else you ever do. Last thing you have here is your question development worksheet, which is what you're going to do in your project. And in your project, you're going to be using this rubric, which I'll change in just a moment. And you're once again faced with knowing what we're doing. Projects are important. They take a long time to grade. And now you're going to see how this works out. These again are percentages of the whole. In this case 120 points, so this is really 100%. If you got all these, you would get 120 points on your score. You have to hit each of these stones as you're walking down the path to be sure that you're going to do well on this. Since you can see the rubric, if for example you don't speak to prior knowledge, you're likely to get a 0 because you skipped it. Use this as your checklist. Last thing I want to mention today is there's academic support workshop calendars. For example, Writing Center does have workshops that you might find interesting, and there's others that, depending on what other classes you're taking, may interest you. That's all I have for now. Have a great time this week. Keep up the good work. Do not plagiarize. Goodbye.